Hi, and welcome to Identify, Evaluate, then Integrate and Assess, a framework for technology integration and student learning. My name is Jamie Averbeck. I'll actually introduce myself in a second, but I would like to start off by thanking EdTech for Future for inviting me to be a part of the collaboration in the Digital K-12 Classroom Online Summit. I'm excited to be one of the 50 plus speakers and part of the 5,000 plus attendees. So as you are following along with my session today, feel free to go to gg.gg/IEIA slides to have a copy of my presentation. And with that, I'm going to get started. Maybe. There we go. So as I said, my name is Jamie Averbeck. I'm the Instructional Technology Coordinator for the Ashwaubenon School District. For those of you not knowing where Ashwaubenon is, it's in Wisconsin. It's home of the Green Bay Packers. So we are Midwest United States. Feel free to reach out to me. My email is there as well as on Twitter. You can follow me at Averbeck Tech. I like to connect online, so feel free to send me any questions or comments about my presentation, and we can definitely network. So this is a picture of my family. My wife Allison, she's a special education teacher, and my boys Aiden, who's my theater arts kid, and Gavin, who's my sports kid, are a sophomore and an eighth grader. So they keep me very busy. So I'm going to start off today by talking about the different frameworks we use for integrating technology. You know, a big I guess model that we use a lot is the SAMR model, and I'm going to start by talking about what that is. So the SAMR model is a framework that was created by Dr. Puntendura that basically categorizes the different degrees of integration. So does the technology used as a direct substitute? Does it augment what was happening in the classroom? Did it modify what happened in the classroom, or did it completely redefine? And if you look on the right there, it really talks about going from an enhancement to transformation. So a good example for that one is always writing, right? So, I could just use a Word document to create a digital version of writing, really from a functionality improvement. That's no different than a journal, right? You really didn't change the lesson other than I made something that wasn't digital. So that would be the S, the substitution. The A, the augmentation is really now we're taking that word and maybe we're using Docs, which would allow a Google Doc, which would allow us basically to access that document from multiple devices. I could have it on my laptop, my Chromebook, my iPad, my phone. I now have access to that document anywhere in the world. So it's changed, technology has changed that just from a direct substitution. Now, when you get to the modification, the M, now maybe you're sharing that Google Doc with a classmate or a teacher, and you now have the ability to co-edit, live edit, give comments, and it goes from a static document in Microsoft Word or that journal, and now it's a fluid shared document online. So that's where you start to see the transformation part. And then the last part, the R, is really the redefinition. And that's now maybe when you are taking that Google Doc and maybe you're using something like Google Meet and the student is going to live edit, but also video conference with a content expert. An example we had a few years back in one of our conservation natural resources classes, we were able to do a Google Hangout with a scientist who was coring the tundra, and students were writing about the elements of what would be in that soil. So what an awesome opportunity. They got to do a Google Hangout with that content expert, share those documents with him, and then ask very pertinent information that impacted their writing. So why that's an R is because without the technology, that would never happen in the classroom. There's no way we could physically take our kids up to the frozen tundra in Alaska to have that experience. But the technology would allow us to do that and allow us to have that online collaboration with the document as well. So that's SAMR. So what's the problem with SAMR? Well, there really isn't a problem with SAMR. I like SAMR. I use it a lot. My issue is it comes down to purpose. And at the end of the day, what is our purpose as educators, as teachers? So, our purpose should never be to use technology. Our purpose should be to ensure student learning. And that's really where the framework that I'm going to share with you all is about where in the process the SAMR model should come into play. So we should reference and use the SAMR model, but it really shouldn't be the first or the only thing we use. There's other things. That's what I'm going to talk about today. So when we're talking about SAMR and integrated technology, you know, there's some other there's some other components to what I think we need to talk about. And the first thing is always down to what is the essential learning that needs to happen. Um, we talk about those of you who are part of PLCs or professional learning communities. It's always question number one: what is it that we want students to learn? And then another component is the depth of knowledge. What's the rigor of what the students are doing? So if we identify what's essential for students to learn, what is the rigor of what they're doing, then we can talk about what are there any technology tools that make it inherently better. If the answer is no, then we shouldn't be using technology. That's just substituting, or that's really not transforming what's happening in the classroom. And then the other piece is the feedback. A lot of people, I think, overlook the benefits of formative feedback tools with technology that allow us for instantaneous and cross miles the ability to give feedback and connections with networking when it comes to technology use. And that's then ultimately where the SAMR model comes into play at the end. So again, I just want to explain the process here. So I think step one is really where we identify what is the content or skill every student needs to learn, whether it's in that unit, lesson, or that for that class. So once you identify that skill, then what is the depth of knowledge required to learn that skill? And how will the learner know about the mastery of that skill? What happens if they don't master it? What happens if they already know it? So really, we start off with what is that essential learning piece? And then we come back to the depth of knowledge and the feedback piece. And then finally, we talk about the integration piece. Can technology transform the learning experience? And then the assessment. How does a learner know if they achieved the intended skill? So really, we're going from PLC question one to questions, oops, I got a typo on my slide 2 and 3, and then ultimately 4. But the SAMR really doesn't come into the end of that process after you've already evaluated and identified the skills and the depth of knowledge needed. Does that make sense? So again, what are the essential skills we want students to learn? What is that depth of knowledge that we're looking for? Is it recall, working with skills and concepts, strategic thinking, extended thinking? I really like to think of DOK along some of these verbs. What are our kids doing? Are they memorizing? Are they comparing? Are they justifying? Are they analyzing and designing? So really digging into what are those skills based on from a content, like what is that target, that learning target, to the actual skills and verbs that our students are going to be doing. And once you identify that, then, oh, I forgot about feedback. Then again, what does feedback look like? How are students going to know if they attain those skills? And then finally, then, is there a tool that'll help us transform or make that learning process easier, maybe greater depth in the DOK? And then also the feedback loop. Does the technology change on that SAMR model? Or all of a sudden does technology allow us to connect and get feedback from in a way that wasn't possible prior? So I'm going to start by giving you a quick example. So the tool that I'm going to end up showing you is Seesaw, but I never want my technology coaches or our teachers to say, hey, I really like Seesaw. How can I use it in my classroom? I want to flip that. I want to start with, hey, my students need to analyze the overall structure of informational text. I want them to do it in a way that they can explain their process, cite evidence, and describe and explain what they're doing. Oh, so let's watch a little clip of this. I'm going to fast forward it here just a second.
This is description. I know this because it describes one thing and it is describing what a glacier is. And some
So here you can see the
and it
student using some
also
annotation tools.
is it says a glacier is a huge piece of ice, which is describing what a glacier is.
So this could be done in a regular notebook, right? This could be done on an iPad with annotation, but what makes this different is the student is explaining their thought process in Seesaw. They're kind of apps matching here. It looks like this is a Google Slides. They're using annotation tools in Seesaw, and then they're sharing the video of them annotating and explaining them. We go back to this, explaining their process about how to analyze structure of informational text. So what this does is it allows the student to both explain their thinking, annotate and cite the evidence of actual tests, and then create that artifact for future referencing. And then from the feedback standpoint, the teacher and actually students in the class who are in that seesaw have the ability to give timely formative feedback right within the app. So from a SAMR standpoint, we're talking about modification redefinition here because Seesaw is allowing for something that was not possible previously. Again, we started with the skill, the ability for students to analyze and overall structure of informational text. And then we start with the rigor. What do we want students to be able to do? They want to cite evidence, explain and describe their process. Then we look for the tool that makes that easiest or best case. Seesaw is a great example of that. So again, start with the learning, not the technology. Identify, evaluate, then integrate and assess with technology. Sorry, I'm a little bit of a broken record on this. So let's look at some other classroom examples. So example, this one's for an AP US Gov class. The tools I'm going to show you are going to be Kahoot and Padlet. So the first thing I want to talk about is the skill, right? The skill that the teacher is looking for. They want their students to be able to review and evaluate their level of understanding, specific to content that's going to be on the AP US Government test, and then create a study guide. Okay, so the learner explains and describes the thought process and cites evidence. So I want to start by talking about this. I have a lot of teachers that love to use Kahoot or Quizlet, things like that, and they're great, kind of engaging game-based reviews. But if all we're doing with kids is giving them true, false, and multiple choice game-based things, that's just substitution, right? We honestly could stand up in the front of the classroom and use no cards and just quiz kids, but the depth of knowledge there is pretty surface level. We're talking about DOK1 and substitution. So what makes this different though is that in Kahoot, you get that quick formative feedback. As a teacher, you can see exactly what percentage of students answered certain questions correct or not correct. You can share that with students, and then you can do something like this on Padlet, where students then go back and they review how they did on the Kahoot, what were areas of strengths and weaknesses, and you have them share what they thought would be things they need to remember, use, create, and you create now this crowdsourced study guide. And again, this is now where SAMR comes into play because Padlet allows for multiple users to share and to cite and create a list of basically relevant terms and content. So if we go back to here, we're talking now about we're modifying something that wasn't possible. We use Kahoot to engage and to basically give a quick formative assessment of what our students know. And then we use that feedback tool that they have where they give you a database of all the kids and students in your classroom and how they did on certain questions. You then share that information with your students so they can self-identify areas they need to improve on. And then you create a Padlet so they can crowdsource all of that, basically that's self-formative that they could use then to create a study guide that inherently is something that all of them can use together. Now, how powerful is that? You're basically putting all of the learning and the sharing onto your students, which as we all know in the learning process, that's what we want. We don't want the teacher to control that content. We want the students to be in control of that content. So let's talk about another example. This time we're going to talk about elementary social studies. The tool I'm going to reference is Mystery Hangouts. So I'm going to start off by talking about, we're going to identify the skill, which is we want our students to analyze the extent in which evidence supports or does not support a claim, and if it does not, adjust the claim appropriately. That is a massive, hard skill. And then the rigor, we want students to cite and explain their thought process around claims and evidence. So if you're not familiar with Mystery Hangouts, basically use Google Hangouts to connect with another location anywhere in the world. And then the students play like a 20 questions game where they ask things like, is your town, state, or country near a major body of water? Yes or no? And then based on that answer, students then cite evidence, whether it's in Google Maps or mapping tools, globes, whatnot, to then come up with a secondary question. And it's a great way to think about evidence claim reasoning with questioning. Okay. However, if you just play 20 questions and you don't go back to, was your question a solid, did it have solid evidence and reasoning behind it? It's just 20 questions, which is DOK level 1 and probably substitution level. You could just play 20 questions with a classmate. Now, what makes this really transforming what's happening in the classroom is when you sit down and you talk about using evidence to citing evidence to change your reasoning. So an example is we had fourth graders that were doing a mystery hangout with a class out east, and our students were trying to figure out questions, and they were asking things like, is your state east of the Mississippi? Well, when you do that, you limit what state it could be. But then a great follow-up question from one of our students was your state one of the original 13 colonies? And the answer was yes. So then you talk about, that was a great question because it really limited the possible answers. So you go back and you dig through that and you really talk about analyzing evidence to support claims. And Mystery Hangouts allows you to do that. And the other cool thing is it allows you to use something like Google Meet or Google Hangouts to connect with kids from all over the world to use these geography skills, which is something that's not possible without the technology. So another example I'm going to use is a high school math example. The tool I'm going to talk about is Desmos. So the skill is, we need our students to explore inequalities involving absolute value and making connections among multiple representations, whether that's expressions, verbal statements, number line graphs, solution sets. The rigor, we want them to be able to compare data and justify solutions. So all of us remember our math days with graph paper, right? We do the graph paper, we have it, we can show it to someone sitting next to us, but it's very, it's flat. That's all we can do with that. What Desmos does, it allows learners to digitally represent their thinking. You can get immediate feedback because you can share that with the teacher or classmates, and then that leads to great discussions where you can talk about approaches and misconceptions. Digitizing our math thinking is a difficult thing. And now, if I would go back, I could go back to using Desmos, saving pictures, talking about that, videotaping what I'm doing in Desmos, and then uploading that into a Seesaw so you really get some of that feedback loop in there. So again, something that was not possible with just graph paper, now we're digitizing it, and the technology allows us something that we couldn't do before. Another example, and this one is obviously something that I like to use quite a bit in my VR world, but if the skill we're using in 6th to 8th grade science is for organisms, is to identify organisms and populations that are dependent on environmental interactions, and then talking about how that impacts their growth. The skill is we want students to be able to refute and claim and cite evidence. Now, the old way of doing this is that we all remember dioramas and posters and trifold boards where we would do a research project on an animal within their environment, right? You might have pictures, and it's a very 2D experience. Well, with Google Tour Creator, students can now create a tour within that environment, have pop-up pictures and pop-up video or pop-up pictures and voiceover about that animal. They even could link in their Google document, right? But now imagine the user learning about that environment, popping on VR goggles and being completely immersed in that environment. So if you're talking about a student, or I mean an organism that lives in the desert, you physically will be in the desert, not physically, virtually be in the desert, looking at that environment and listening to the student citing claims and reasonings about factors that impact that organism's life within that environment. So you go from a very 2D experience to a very immersive experience via virtual reality, something that a Google Tour Creator allows you to do. Again, this is redefinition at its best. Without the technology, there's no way you could do this, and it really changes the learning experience for both the student and the I guess the viewer, right? So with all of these examples, we're always starting with the learning, not the technology. The My expectation for our teachers is never to use technology. My expectation is to use technology when it enhances the learning. Learner focused. So we need to identify the skill, evaluate the rigor, and then talk about if there's integration or assessment tools with technology that enhance that learning experience. So with that, I really want to thank EdTech for Future for allowing me to present my session today as part of the collaboration in the Digital K-12 Classroom Online Summit. Again, there's all sorts of sessions and speakers, so please continue to watch and learn with us. And I will be also be participating in other sessions and watching and learning with you. I'd love to connect. If you want to talk more about this, please reach out to me at Averbeck Tech on Twitter, or that's my email address at ashwaubenonk12.org. It was a great time. I hope you enjoyed the session. Have a great day.